here towards the tail end of the conference. And as Lena mentioned, a lot of my experience comes from brand and creative and media strategy over in the advertising world. So I think it's an interesting time as a lot of people in communications and PR are driving harder towards, being able to bring more insights and, more performance-driven measures to the business. I could bring some of those experiences and share those, and let's take it from there. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that'll all go as planned. And
yep,
let me.
It's fine. It's good.
Okay, great. What I'm going to talk about is, as we're moving into this, that, insights I found throughout my career obviously are one of the special and really transformative things that can change brand fortunes, in a very meaningful and broad way across an organization. But what I also continue to see over time is that they can be really hard to come by. So I just want to talk about, as we think about kind of the future and moving into that, what are some of the things we need to recognize, and what are some of the things that hopefully we can do about it? So the first is just the human sort of disconnect sometimes that we have between what goes on in terms of our marketing world and what's going on with consumers. And what I mean by that is that we tend to deal, you think about our day-to-day lives in marketing and communications, and we're just immersed, right? We have weekly performance meetings. We're continually looking at acquisition metrics, channel performance. So we're going hardcore into data, trying to find nuggets of information that we can use. But it's always good to keep in mind that as we're doing this and coming up with these rational conversations, people live in a very different world, right? We tend to make 95% of our decisions are actually start unconsciously. We're super emotional, and we're doing it hundreds of times a day. So one of the big things that I've always found from an insights perspective is, how can you sort of understand the humanity behind the data and start to bring that to life in a well-rounded way? And that kind of leads me to really making sure that we have a common understanding of what insights are. Because, one of the things I've seen is that they tend to be attached to almost everything I see, right? Everybody's talking about actionable information, or actionable data, and all these things. But a lot of times, those more observation driven than insight. What I mean by that is observations are basically a single point of data. We see that people are snacking late at night, and, that describes a specific thing that's happening that might give us some catalyst for doing something about it. But insights are much broader. It's a whole new understanding of human motivation. Why are people snacking late at night? Is that because they only do it because there's a sense of, it's a big day tomorrow, or there's a sense of anxiety and they're dealing with it? Once you know that, it starts to drive a whole host of things beyond just, putting an ad, at 11 at night. And the important thing is that a lot of the observations we have are fairly common to the category, right? Other people are seeing that as well. But when you talk about an insight, that's really unique to the brand. And I'll get into that in a little bit as well. And this is just an example. And I pulled some old and I have some new stuff along the way here that I'll reference. This is old, but the agency I worked at did a thing called Got Milk. And I'm not sure, how popular that became globally, but it became a very big deal here in the US. And it's an example of going from data-led observation to actually more human-driven insight. And in this case, for 20 years, milk sales were going down, but the industry continued to promote it based on all the sort of rational data they had. Milk was good for you. It had nutrients, it had calcium, or even, it was paired with food, and you could, eat it, drink it with this and have it with this and have it on this occasion. But what turned everything around when we got the business was actually looking at where the emotion was. And where the emotion was wasn't necessarily when you had it, but it's when you didn't have it. And we did research that took milk away from people for a week. So I'm just going to show an ad from back then to show what, kind of hopefully illustrate what an insight can do versus an observation. Sorry, wrong way. Oh, it's not letting me do that. Sorry, I got to get out for a sec. Hopefully you can hear it.
That was the Vienna Wood Dance in D, one of my all-time favorites. And now let's make that random call with today's $10,000 question. It's a tough one. Who shot Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel? All right, let's go to the phones and see who's out there. Hello, for $10,000. Who shot... Excuse me? Your time is almost up. I'm sorry, maybe next time.
Got milk.
Sorry. So there's an example of, once we understood that all the emotion was in these moments, it opened up not only things about a campaign, it wasn't always just about advertising, but even when you would go to this was kind of new back then. Yeah, when was the last time you saw a push button phone? But this is also like in the supermarket, it gave rise to putting little, those little dividers on the grocery thing, where it said got milk. It was just a reminder. And it really, for the first time after 20 years of decline, milk sales started going up and in a very sustained way. So the value of that is that, think about observations versus insights. Observations are very data-led and this is great stuff. I mean, a lot of businesses are built on being really smart about these observations. But there is a difference between being just, data-led observations versus insight, which are data-fed. Data is super important to them, but it's also the ability to look at that in a broader contextual type of understanding, which is not just, that data point itself, but why is that happening? And also it's important, that we realize that observations are pretty plentiful. You should be having those all the time, but real transformative insights are fairly rare. And the important thing about it is that, you're going from, making decisions based just purely on these single data points, which, like I said, the category can kind of see that. So it feels kind of like parity at times, but real differentiation, which is the cornerstone of any brand's value out there, is really driven by their ability to have insights into their customer relationship that other brands don't have. So the third point I'm going to talk about that sort of, get us in the way of being able to like bring insights is that when we try to jump and focus too much on reputation without focusing first on authenticity, what some people call purpose as well, but I'm going to use this phrase. And, kind of when I talk about the long and short of it, the long of it usually is being able to identify what seems like a very simple thing, but I've been in processes that have gone on for months with workshops about trying to get to this specific thing. And the great brands have a very clear understanding of the why, right? What is it that we bring to the world that people really want, that they really need? And you find that intersection and it's really important. But the important thing about being able to continually activate against your brand is also keeping in mind the more immediate measures. What's going on with your category? How are you delivering on your promise better than other brands? And finally, critically, is the idea of culture. What about at this moment in time? How does that play out? How does that work? What do you have permission to do, or what should you stay away from? And if you're continually on top of this and you define this and you have consensus across an organization, it's a very powerful place to be. And I'll just give, for example, and these are well known, but if you look at two great brands, Nike and McDonald's, right? Now, Nike did a great job. I don't know if people are familiar with Colin Kaepernick. He's an American NFL football player, and he started kneeling during the national anthem, and he was protesting the excessive violence by police against the Black community. And it became very political, right? Everybody, started saying, no, you're disrespecting the flag, you're disrespecting the military, but really he was just doing a straight protest. And Nike, did something that was very much on brand for them. It's very much that they could deliver against, which is the idea of believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. And he did. He sacrificed his career. He has not played in the NFL since this happened. But like I said, that's very true to Nike, and it's very true to the cultural moment. But you look at McDonald's, and they actually did a very cool thing. I think this was in Brazil, right, where they separated the arches to represent, stay 6 feet apart. But what they totally missed in terms of the cultural thing and around the world, I think, was that, all of a sudden McDonald's workers were frontline workers out there. So the cultural context at the moment was, these are people who were like in communities, McDonald's, especially in the US and urban communities and Black, ethnic communities, they're a very important place for people to hang out and get together. So people looked at it as like, how are we, taking care of these frontline workers? And they were talking about, something about in a more high level aspect, and it kind of blew up on them. So again, it's important to understand not only that relationship that you want to have between brand and consumer, but what's happening culturally at the time to give you license to be able to say something or not. And, these are kind of big purpose brands, but when I talk about that, I think, sometimes, if you're Southwest Airlines here, or there's budget airlines all over the world, it's a great purpose just to say, we're going to get you from one place to another as cheaply as possible. It doesn't have to be about saving the world. It's just absolute clarity on that. So Southwest, every idea that they put into what they did was about actually making it a low cost thing. So I just want to clarify, when I talk about purpose, it doesn't always have to be about the super high-minded stuff. So I just want to kind of keep that, because if I talk about a good thing about Nike, I want to say like one of the rare times that they kind of screwed up. And this is because I worked on Adidas for a while. And when, this is back when they were getting into the skateboard market. And here's an example of Nike being nobody's smarter about their brand and consumer and category. But what they didn't understand about this particular category and the culture of it was that skateboarding is a very grounds up kind of category. So they applied their reputation, right? That Nike did the reputation formula. We're going to come in, we're going to pay athletes a lot of money, we're going to do some big fancy advertising, and then we're going to take over this category. But everybody there was all about skate culture. They were about the local skate shop that supported them and the people who actually made it happen. So it totally bombed for them in a very rare misstep for them. Whereas while we're working on Adidas, our approach was very much build relationships, have programs in place, have the things in place that actually show that you're legitimately contributing to this community before you try and take it over, because they love the brands who are actually grew up with in that category. So, that reality was very important to them as well. So a fourth is the idea that what gets in our way of developing insight sometimes is that we just look at data in the silos, right? We have an amazing amount of expertise across a variety of departments in the marketing and communications world who are all super smart about their KPIs. But when they don't integrate, and I think everybody in every survey I see, across the PR world says that integration with marketing and more broadly is going to be the biggest thing to happen over the next few years. That's really critical. So here's what that looks like. And I think actually a great way to think about it, and from some of the consulting and other work that I've done, is actually in the dashboard phase, because that's where it all comes to fruition. So a lot of dashboards, when I come in, I look at, and it just looks basically like an aggregation of silos. Like I said, each of those unto themselves, whether it's the social team or the mass media team, could be the advertising or performance marketing, that they've all got their metrics that they're working against. But when you would look at this, and especially when people in the C-suite would look at it, it's like, is that good? Is that bad? How do I understand that? So a lot of what we would do is actually use this particular moment to, recraft it. So because we all understand things as stories, and nobody knows that better than this community, but actually that story can be told even, or should be supported and reflected within a dashboard. So what does that mean? I would encourage people just to actually have, even on a dashboard, what is your business mission and what is your brand mission? Because usually there's specific things that you are aiming for that a lot of people are going to be measured against at the end of the day. And what it forces everybody to do is start to think about, what am I contributing to and how am I contributing to that? So it really started to up the game of folks as they thought about, okay, if I'm trying to actually prove that my function is contributing to the big business issues or brand issues that the C-suite cares about, that's actually going to increase the value of what I do. And the other thing that we've seen, and this, or at least I've seemed to have seen over the past number of years, is a lot of movement between departments, like things going in and out of PR, in and out of the comms things, social coming in, social going out, influencers moving around. But when you start to actually organize it like this, it provides more clarity, so you can have more consistency about who's responsible for what, and how did these groups integrate together to actually make it all happen. hopefully we're getting this, but we can ask questions, I think, after this is done. And then another point, number 5 is the idea of, we treat milestones like destinations. And I think that wastes a lot of really good work. I see a lot of really brilliant insight reports, analysis, things like that go, and that's where it ends. And people really haven't thought enough about the activation of these things to do it. So people present these reports, they do kind of the mic drop, but it's kind of like not so fast, because the question always is, now what? How do I actually extract value out of these reports in a way? And I'll just share, there's different frameworks, but what we've been doing, in our work is kind of like, it's like a start at the end kind of proposition, right? So if you as a team have really great clarity on how your insights and how your work is going to be activated at the end, and if you have that view from the beginning, it's really great. So a great starting point is the consumer journey, whether it's awareness, quality of awareness, the engagement or impact that you're going to have. But kind of the big piece that we've always felt was missing and have added into, how we look at this is, what about the brand levers? So when we go into a project, what we want to understand is, which of the 3, levers and what elements of those are the things that are going to be really critical to driving it, because there's obviously dozens of brand drivers, but they really group very neatly into 3 big areas: into experience, how are you actually, providing the best possible experience through your product, your site, your brand, so the overall customer experience. Then there's the values. Obviously the values are, I talked earlier about how so much is driven by emotion, but what do you share with your customers out there, and how are you bringing that out? And finally, the offer, what are the features? What's the value prop? What are you, doing for them? And if you can actually understand this model for your client and be able to sort of have this in your mind as you're developing your framework for how are we going to go through data gathering, how are we going to go through content creation, how are we going to do all the stuff we're going to do. If you don't know this before you start doing that, then you're just serving up a laundry list of things, I believe, that actually have less value, or just they end up on the shelf where people say like, okay, we did that, great, happy to do it. And kind of a parting thought, because I do realize this is called communication trend for the future, and I believe a lot of these things drive into it, but just, I thought it was, why do I feel insights are such a kind of promising and continuing critical component. I think about like a lot of my life was brand driven, right? There wasn't a lot of accountability, but we knew it worked. We knew it did something. We didn't know what. It was very story driven. And then, with digital, the pendulum swung hard, right? And everybody was just like all in on data. And what I really believe is happening now is we're seeing this actual healthier balance, but it's not the way it used to be. It's not like, okay, we're bringing in the old brand stuff. It's actually kind of the way I think about it is you kind of flip the bottoms there. You kind of, look at brands as actually being more accountable. So as brand people, brand strategy, we need to be able to continually answer in a better and better way, how is our work actually contributing to the business in some way? And it's not going to be perfect correlation, but it's going to, be happening in a more and more, I think, connected way over time. And then on the data side, I think it's not just the data points, but how is the data actually helping us tell the stories that we need to tell? So that was it. I don't know if I'm on time or not, hopefully, but I am going to stop sharing my screen, I think, if I can find my cursor.